my name is Estelle Lucas. I work in the industry and I am also the managing director of Bigger Sister Channel, a peer-to-peer education platform for workers in the industry. For those that don't know, Bigger Sister Channel is currently doing two programs: a skill sharing workshop program where we do monthly workshops with workers, either online or in person, or the economic empowerment program where we're going to be focusing on sort of foundational skills to do with finance. This video kind of relates to both of these programs, and I'm willing to do a workshop on this to help people with their application if there's enough interest. Otherwise, this is just a resource for you to better understand what the NDIS is, if it's applicable for you, and how to get the most out of it. And the reason why I want to go into this today is because I know that a lot of workers are disabled or neurodivergent. And I know a lot of us go into the industry to be able to afford a lifestyle where you are disabled in an inherently ableist world. It is very expensive. I think the NDIS is, a lot of people who are eligible for the NDIS don't know how to access it. And so the purpose of this video is to educate you on what the NDIS is, help you unpack maybe some of the internalized ableist rhetoric that is in your mind that makes you feel like you're unworthy of accessing this service or that you don't deserve it. And also to sort of demystify the process as I've been through it and seen it through to the other side. For those that don't know, the NDIS stands for the National Disability Insurance Scheme, and it's based in Australia. From what I know, there's not many other countries that do this. It's sort of a social welfare program. And I guess the underlying assumptions with this program is that you insure people that have disabilities because they can eat a lot of the use a lot of the infrastructure from like an economics perspective. This is my opinion. It's not fully educated or informed, but I think because if you run the numbers, the cost of being disabled is higher for the system, for as a social net for our community, than if you have some of your basic needs met through something like the NDIS. Because when you're sort of rock bottom and you're disabled, you're like, not a burden, I hate that word, but you know, it costs. And anyone that has a disability understands, like, there is a cost to being disabled. It is expensive being sick. And the worse that you get, either through illness or through the cost of financially being sick, the less you are able to contribute to others, be connected to your community, and just have a good quality of life. So I think that's the underlying sort of principle behind it. But if we look at the website, and not refer to my mind, the NDIS provides funding to eligible people with disability to gain more time with family and friends, greater independence, access to new skills, jobs, or volunteering in their community, and improved quality of life. The NDIS also connects anyone with a disability to services in their community. This includes connections to doctors, community groups, sporting clubs, support groups, libraries, and schools, as well as providing information about what support is provided by each state and territory government. The NDIS now supports over 500,000 Australians with disability to access the services and supports they need. Now, I think the first thing I want to sort of discuss or unpack is this idea of what is a disability. Now, this is a hot topic and still contested. Even within the NDIS, I know from my application, my primary diagnosis, and I can tell you this as like a hard fact. My PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoric disorder, was the most difficult part of my health. And this was a monthly reoccurrence because it's got to do with your cycles. And I put that as my primary diagnosis, but the NDIS doesn't recognize PMDD, and I didn't know that. So what our idea of a disability is going to differ depending on what perspective you look at it. from the perspective of the NDIS, they didn't consider PMDD a disability, probably because the research around PMDD is still rudimentary in comparison to other illnesses. But from my lived experience, I know for a fact that PMDD was the one that was making me most disabled or most dysfunctional in my day-to-day living. So, and then there's this other perception, if there's this other way of looking at it. If you look at it from, I guess, a societal point of view, we often associate people that have disability with people who are visibly disabled. So people who struggle to walk or hold things or lift things or see things or perceive things, like, or maybe something a bit more cognitive, like, oh, they're a little bit slow, or they can't talk properly, or I don't know, something like this, something that's associated with humanness, that someone cannot do. And while that can be considered disabled, it's not the only thing that can impair your day-to-day functioning. There is what we call invisible illnesses, and I think I'm a pretty good example of that, where the conditions that we experience are much more cognitive, that live more in the brain, less on the outside, more on the inside, less on the outside, but can be just as devastatingly difficult to live with as, say, I don't know, not being able to move your legs or something like this. Not that I'm comparing these experiences, but I'm just saying that they're just as difficult to navigate. At least, I guess, when you have a physical, visible impairment, people can see what you need, like see what the difficulties are, and probably, you know, hopefully, if they're a good person, anticipate what your needs are and then accommodate for it. When you don't have a visible disability, even for yourself, it can be very difficult to anticipate what you need, because you literally have to rely on your inner dialogue and your ability to communicate your experience to be able to advocate for what you need and ask for those accommodations. No one's going to do that for you because no one else is experiencing it. So if you have an invisible disability, and I think a lot of sex workers do, then it's really your responsibility to fully understand how your health impacts your quality of life, your functioning, your day-to-day operations, and what sort of assistance, accommodation, or support you need to improve your conditions, your living conditions. Now, this whole process took me probably at least 15 years. So before I go into like the NDIS and the semantics of how it all works, I'm going to go through my story. So I want you to understand, especially from someone that it looks so physically abling, especially because I can be quite articulate and I know how to communicate, how easy it is to slip through the cracks of our public health system and our collective understanding of disability. So my health issues sort of began around the ages of, there's an argument there. We'll say 14. We'll say when my first menses happened. So when my first cycle happened, that's kind of when everything went downhill. Arguably, that's when it all happened. Now, I remember presenting at the doctor at 14 years old and being like, something's not right with my cycles. I actually remember even earlier than that, like maybe being 13, which is when I got my cycles, and crying on the floor in my bedroom in a tight ball, and just weeping. And my mum came in and she was like, what's wrong with you? What are you doing? And I was like, I'm just in a lot of pain. And I remember thinking, I'm so weak. I'm such a pathetic woman. Like, I'm such a pathetic girl, because I thought that this is what everyone experienced. Like, this level of pain, I thought was normal, and that I was abnormal for not being able to tolerate it, or not being resilient enough, and for being hurt, basically. I blame myself for being hurt. I didn't conceive that what I was experiencing was abnormal. And I remember my mum, she looked quite resigned, and she said, "Oh, I was hoping it would skip you." And I was like, "What the hell does that mean, mother?" And she was like, all the women in our family have had difficulties with their cycle. So that was my first clue. That was my first clue that something was amiss. From there, we're not going to go through my whole medical history, but I do want to go through some key points. I remember presenting at the doctors at 14 years old and saying something is not right with my cycles. I feel excruciating pain on all levels of consciousness, on all levels of being, and the doctors, being doctors and being trained the way that they are, and being, our understanding of female health is very rudimentary in comparison to some other parts of the human condition. He was just like, all right, let's just stop your periods. That will solve the problem. And I did that. And the point of that piece of information is that I presented at a very young age. So at no point did I sort of deny myself, although I know this is true for many people. I think there are many people who have invisible disabilities or illnesses that do not present at a young age. But mine is pretty clear cut. I presented at a very young age. I said something wasn't right. And I think something that works in my favor, especially for when I went through the process of the NDIS, is I had a very strong medical record of seeking out medical intervention to treat my conditions, because it was intolerable, my life experience. There are other conditions as well that I had. But at no point did I think I don't deserve medical intervention. However, there is a however. So because I associated in my childlike mind, in my new brain, in this very old world, in my new brain, I thought it was a bit more normal to have women problems than it was to have mental health problems. I associated like women health problems as something that was fixable. I associated mental health problems, I thought that the domain of women's health was the doctor's domain. Once I felt like that the domain of mental health was within your control and means. So I thought any symptom related to any sort of mental illness like anxiety and depression, that was all your brain playing tricks on you, and you just have to think better or be better or like feel better, right? To be better. That's what I thought the trick was. So I was about 21 years old before I finally accepted some sort of mental health support. Mind you, I have all the telltale signs of debilitating, and also it's getting worse mental health from the ages of 14, we'll say. And the only reason I saw a psychologist is because my doctor, who advocated for my health, and this is very rare, I find, to have a doctor actually care about you and actually push you to do the thing for your health. He said, you need to see a psychologist. And I said, no, I'm not that type of person. I don't need help. I'm not broken. I can fix myself. Rah, rah. This is internalized ableist attitudes, by the way. This is how I was conditioned to think about mental health. And I wasn't ready to do the work there was no reason for me to believe that was incorrect. Anyway, until now, until my doctor was begging me, please see a psychologist. And another reason why I didn't want to see a psychologist, I had a negative experience when I was younger in school. 2, I was a worker, so I knew by virtue of being a worker and the way discrimination and stigma works, that I would be paying this person $200, $300, $400 plus to argue with them about the relevance of my work to my mental health, when I know for a fact that my mental health has been what it is way before I entered the industry, way before that. And then the industry plays very little impact in this. And if it does, it has more to do with society's perception of you and other people's perception of you rather than the job itself. So knowing this, I was just very adverse to the idea of seeking help. And he bartered with me. He said, if I matchmake you with someone appropriate, will you accept this offer? And I said, deal. Shook hands. saw a psychologist. And from there, the reason why I'm telling you this story is because I got onto the NDIS last year. I'm turning 33 this year. So I was 31 years old. Mind you, all of this was happening from a very early age. I didn't start taking medicine. And when I say medicine, I mean like antidepressants and all that, like mental health medicines, until much like later 20s. Because again, I thought it was all within my means, and I was willing to do all the therapies and all the improvements on my behavior and my way that I think. I didn't see it as like a chemical, I didn't see it as a disability. I didn't see myself as a disabled person. I was high functioning, I was high achieving. How could I be disabled, right? How could I be disabled when I could still, and I remember as well from a very young age thinking to myself, I will never let my differences, disability, what I call disability differences, define who I am. I will never let myself say that I can't do this thing because of my differences, because of my disability. And that's something that stuck with me. So that's why I was a high achiever. That's why I was high functioning. I had a strong vigor from a young age. And that's why I refused to be ill. I refused. And but at great cost at my health as well, because I'm pushing myself. And although I'm achieving all these things, and although I'm functional in front of people, when I go behind closed doors, I fall apart, and it hurts so much, and I've hurt myself in so many ways, and all these issues that we don't need to go into. But the point is, I was suffering, and I was suffering silently, because I thought that was normal. That was the normal thing to do, and I didn't think I was disabled. It took me so long. It took me over 15 years to accept that I was disabled. And I entered the industry because I remember going to university full-time, working full-time, and feeling the decline of my health, and knowing that I couldn't keep it up forever. So I entered the industry to relieve myself of some of the pressure. But I still didn't believe, I didn't even suspect that I was disabled. So so before you even consider the NDIS, I really want you to consider your story. I really want you to consider what impact is your health playing on your ability to function day to day. And I don't mean, you can still be high functioning and high achieving and still be disabled and still need accommodations. You might just not be used to knowing what those things are or advocating for it. And I say all of this initially because once you accept that you have a disability, the next step is convincing everyone else, because not everyone's going to accept it, especially if you're able presenting like I am. I've had pushback for when I've announced that I'm, not that I, enter discussions with that announcement, but when I do announce that I am disabled, I'll always be, but you look, or you don't look, or blah, 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 and then I have to argue with them, and I don't want to argue with them. They don't believe me. And so you have to, once you get comfortable with yourself and your disability and you understand yourself more, you have to learn how to advocate for yourself in a way where it doesn't feel like you're being rejected as well. And if you, like me, have been medically gaslighted and just bounced around the public health system, then you know how demoralizing the system is, and how much it hurts you, and how much it makes you not want to try again, and how much you just want to give up, and how much you just don't want to expose yourself to that harm again. But at the end, if you're eligible for the NDIS, it is worth giving it a shot, because it will alleviate a lot of your suffering, and it doesn't have to be this way. So, with all that said, to wrap up this section of the video, I want you to think about, what is your disability? What is your experience in the public healthcare system? Is this a health condition that impacts my day-to-day living? If yes, look into the NDIS. We can look at the next step. So, do you have a disability caused by a permanent impairment? From a lived experience point of view versus an NDIS like policy, government policy point of view. But these are two different glasses that we're going to put on and compare.